The night seemed ordinary, peaceful, one of those nights where the whole house breathes in silence. You were lying on the living room sofa, a light blanket over your legs, while the television still glowed at an almost inaudible volume, just to keep you company. The medicine you had taken earlier weighed on your eyelids, leaving your body limp and your mind slow, as if you were between two worlds, the world of sleep and the world of consciousness. It was a strange feeling. You could hear everything, but you couldn't react quickly. And it was exactly in this state that something happened, something that would completely change your life. The door creaked softly, as if someone were trying not to make a sound. You didn't open your eyes, but your hearing, sharpened by the silence of the night, caught careful footsteps crossing the living room floor. The familiar scent of your son-in-law's cologne filled the air. It was discreet, but unmistakable. He was always very well dressed, always very elegant, perhaps to impress, perhaps to hide. He believed you were fast asleep, and, at that moment, that belief would be the only reason you heard something that should never have been said, something that would open your eyes to a truth so dark that even today it makes your stomach churn when you remember it. The sound of his voice came out low, almost a whisper. Yeah, she won't last long. The phrase sent a chill down his spine. Your body, previously heavy with sleep, seemed to awaken with a jolt of adrenaline. Your heart began to beat so fast that even your breathing seemed to keep pace with the frantic rhythm. You remained motionless, fighting the urge to react. Every second, a question echoed loudly within you. He's talking? About me? The feeling of vulnerability was overwhelming. You were lying there, weak, defenseless, while the man who should have been part of your family, someone who supposedly respected you, spoke of you as if you were nearing the end, as if your life had an expiration date, as if he were counting on it. His whisper continued, more confident, like someone who believes he is on safe ground. No, I don't think she even noticed today. It's just a matter of time. Her stomach churned. Your world, which for years seemed under control, suddenly spun toward an abyss. You tried to rationalize. Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe it was someone else. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. But the way he spoke, the coldness, the confidence in his voice, all of that told you he wasn't commenting on something innocent. He was stating it, confirming it, planning it. And here's the trigger of curiosity that captivates the audience. Why would he say something like that? What does he know? What is he hiding? Every detail of the scene seemed to take on a new meaning. The click of the door closing, the muffled tone of the call on speakerphone, the calculated rhythm of his walk. You heard the slight scraping of a chair, as if he were settling in for a longer conversation. And it was at that moment that you understood that, if you wanted to unravel this, you would need to listen. You would need to remain still. You would need to pretend exactly what he believed, that you were fast asleep. The room, once a place of rest, had become a silent battlefield. There, between the slow, forced breathing you tried to hide and the distant echo of the television, you had only two things: fear and the urgent need to understand what was happening. It was then that a cruel and overwhelming truth struck his mind. If he was saying that you wouldn't last long, maybe that wasn't just a comment. Maybe it was a plan. And that thought, just that one, was more than enough to set her life on a completely unexpected path. His whisper, on that seemingly ordinary night, was the spark that ignited a revelation she never imagined facing within her own family. Before that night, if someone had asked you who your son-in-law was, you probably would have answered without hesitation. A good man. He always presented himself this way, impeccable, polite, kind, with that calm smile that seemed tailor-made to win anyone's trust. He knew exactly how to behave, how to speak, how to make himself admired. He never raised his voice, never openly showed coldness, never let any sign of loss of control show. On the contrary, he was the type of person who always seemed ready to help, always available to offer rides, carry bags, solve household problems, or even help you climb stairs when you were tired. He had that thing, a presence that exuded security, and for a long time, you believed it without question. After all, he treated his daughter like a precious jewel. At least, that's what everyone saw. An attentive, present husband, willing to accompany her to appointments, to share tasks, to show understanding when she went through difficult times. To those observing from the outside, and even to you yourself, he was almost a model of partnership. His daughter spoke of him with a sparkle in her eyes. "He takes care of me like no one ever has," she would say with a smile that warmed your heart, and that phrase always made you believe she was safe, loved, happy. She would tell stories of how helpful he was, how he supported her projects, how he always showed up with small gestures, flowers, chocolate, sweet notes. These gestures made you think your daughter had found the kind of man any mother would want for her own family. And that's the point that makes it all the more disturbing. He was convincing. Convincing enough to erase any doubt. Convincing enough to continue being admired even after strange behavior that, at the time, seemed like just bad days. You remember small things, a distant look, a clenched jaw when you thought no one was watching, a cold comment disguised as a joke. But they were things so quick, so subtle, that you never thought to connect the dots. Who would suspect such a perfect smile? Who would question? Someone who offered to help even with things they didn't need? Over time, you realized he had a special talent to make each person believe exactly what he wanted them to believe. When he was with his family, he was the ideal son-in-law. When he was with his wife, he was a devoted husband. When he was with strangers, he was polite and charming. And you trusted that image for years. But that night, when you heard the whisper, "She won't last long," everything you thought you knew began to crack like glass pressed from the inside. The voice that had once sounded gentle now had a cold, calculated, almost indifferent tone. It was as if you were listening to someone else. He didn't seem like the same man who held your hand on that birthday when you were sad. He didn't seem like the same man who had taken you to the doctor once when your daughter was swamped with work. He didn't seem like the same man who said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of her." There, in the darkness of the room, you realized that that constant smile might not be a reflection of her personality, but rather a mask. A mask so well constructed that it fooled you, your daughter, and probably everyone around you. Masks like that don't break easily. They wear down little by little, leaving small cracks. And that night, what you heard was exactly that. A sharp tear in the perfect surface he always presented. The kind of tear impossible to ignore. The kind of tear that makes you realize that this man, behind all the cordiality, might be hiding something much darker. Intentions, plans, secrets you never considered possible. His relationship with his daughter, so harmonious at first glance, now seemed like a carefully rehearsed play. An act. A performance for the outside world. And this question began to sprout, silently and painfully, inside you. If he's capable of saying something so cruel, believing I'm asleep, what else is he capable of doing when no one is looking? The contrast is brutal. The image of the exemplary husband clashes violently with that venomous phrase. Nothing matched. Nothing made sense. It was as if two completely different versions of the same person were coexisting. One public, brilliant, impeccable. The other hidden, cold, dangerous. And for the first time, you felt the weight of that discovery. The feeling that perhaps you never really knew the man who entered your home. Maybe your daughter didn't either. Maybe nobody did. And within this silent revelation, a new fear began to grow. What did he really want? That night, you weren't simply resting on the sofa, nor were you just tired after an ordinary day. Your body carried the accumulated weight of difficult weeks, sleepless nights, and worries mixed with physical aches and pains. It was one of those periods when the body seems to cry out for help, begging for a gentler pace. But life doesn't wait, and you kept trying to keep up. The doctor had asked you to rest more. In recent days, you had been feeling dizzy, weak in your legs, and so profoundly exhausted it seemed to come from your soul. Tests were still being done, and there was no clear diagnosis, only the advice to rest and take medication to stabilize your blood pressure and help with the constant headache. This medication, although effective, always left you feeling slower, drowsy, somewhat disconnected, as if you were submerged in warm, heavy water. Your daughter had insisted that you stay at that house during the week. She wanted to take care of you, make sure you were safe and well looked after. She lovingly prepared the sofa, added extra cushions, arranged a soft blanket, and left your favorite tea on the coffee table. Everything seemed comfortable, calm, and peaceful. You felt welcomed, and grateful too. The problem is that we are not always safe where we think we are. We are not always safe around those we believe love us. As the medicine began to take effect, a numbness overcame your body. The warmth of the blanket, the silence of the room, the television at a low volume, all of this created an atmosphere that pushed you into a state between sleep and unconsciousness. Your eyes closed on their own. Your muscles relaxed to the point where you could no longer get up. It was as if you were trapped inside your own body, hearing, feeling, but unable to act quickly. And it was precisely in this state that his son-in-law entered. That's the crucial point. You weren't sleeping because you wanted to. You were vulnerable because your body lacked the strength. The medication that was supposed to protect you from discomfort ended up leaving you exposed, defenseless, fragile. You couldn't get up to ask what he was saying. You couldn't confront him. You couldn't even show that you were alert. All you could do was listen. And this vulnerability, however painful it may be, is what makes the audience feel the true weight of the situation. Anguish, fear, the feeling of imminent danger. Your heart raced when you heard the first whisper, but your body remained still. You wanted to react. You wanted to stand up. You wanted to protect yourself, but you couldn't. Your hands were heavy, your legs weak, your mouth too dry to speak. It was as if you were trapped inside yourself, aware of the danger, but unable to do anything immediately. And that thought, that doubt that arises like a blade slowly piercing through, is what tormented you most in that moment. What if he knew? What if that's exactly what he was counting on? The idea that someone might be waiting for your vulnerability to act, to say things they shouldn't, to plan something shady, was unbearable, because you began to realize that that whisper wasn't just a comment. It was a reflection of something that had been going on before. You remembered how he would sometimes watch you when you thought no one was noticing, how he would ask about your medication, how he insisted you get more rest, how he would say things like, "She needs more care. She's getting tired too quickly. Perhaps it would be better if she stayed here longer." At the time, those phrases sounded like concern. Now, in light of what you've heard, they sound like something else. They sound like study, evaluation, monitoring, and the audience begins to feel the same. The tension of realizing that perhaps that man was waiting for the exact moment when you would be defenseless, that perhaps he was planning his moves, that perhaps he had an interest in you being in that state. As he spoke on the phone, you felt your breath catch in your chest. Your mind seemed like a whirlwind, trying to piece together fragments you didn't even know were scattered. Each syllable of his was a stab that penetrated deeper. Each sentence was a piece of a puzzle you didn't want to assemble, but now were forced to see. And the question that lingers, the question that grips the viewer through their gut, is precisely the one you thought of in that desperate moment. What if he's counting on that? What if my vulnerability is exactly what he wants? That doubt, that pang of fear never left you, even after he left the room, even after the house fell silent again, even when you finally managed to open your eyes fully. The vulnerability of that night became your greatest weapon, and at the same time, the greatest threat you had ever faced. When you heard that phrase, "She won't last long," something inside you broke, but something else awakened. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't a thirst for revenge. It was something deeper, more primal, something that exists in anyone who feels they are in danger. Survival instinct. Your body felt heavy, your mind slow from the medication, but the fear acted like an electric shock. With every word your son-in-law spoke, you felt you couldn't simply let it slip away, like a bad dream that vanishes at dawn. No, it needed to be preserved, recorded, because deep down, a part of you already knew. If you ever told this story without proof, they would say it was an exaggeration, confusion, drama, a side effect of the medication. They would say you misunderstood. And that's precisely where the decision comes in. Not a calm, thoughtful, logical decision, but it was an instinctive decision, an impulse, a self-protective reaction. You felt your heart pounding too hard, as if the sound of your heartbeats could be heard throughout the entire room. Your hands trembled slightly from weakness, but also from adrenaline. You couldn't get up, but you still had some control over something. Your arm, your fingers, your phone, which was nearby on the small table next to the sofa, placed there a few hours earlier by your own daughter, in case you needed something that night. If I can get my hands on the phone, I can record this. This thought came to him clearly, directly, as if someone had whispered it in his ear. You took a deep breath, trying not to change your rhythm so as not to arouse suspicion. He believed you were fast asleep. That was what protected you at that moment. Any sudden movement could make him stop talking, change the subject, go to another part of the house. So, every gesture you made needed to be calculated, slow, discreet. With effort, you stretched your fingers slightly under the blanket. Your arm felt like it weighed a ton. The distance to the phone, which would normally be insignificant, now seemed like a marathon. But you continued, millimeter by millimeter. First, you found the edge of the sofa. Then, you groped the coffee table, feeling the texture of the wood under your fingertips, until, finally, you touched the cold, familiar object, the cell phone. The touch of the device in his hand gave him a small spark of hope. I can do it. Meanwhile, his son-in-law's voice continued in the background, low but clear enough to be understood. Look, the doctor said it himself. She's getting weaker. We just need to be patient. Each word was a punch, but also fuel, to keep you going. You slowly slid your phone towards you, pulling it toward your body and partially hiding it under the blanket so that any movement would be less noticeable. Your trembling thumb found the side of the device and pressed the button to turn on the screen. The light faintly illuminated the inside of the blanket, but outside, in the dark room, nothing seemed to have changed. You knew exactly where the voice recorder icon was. It wasn't the first time you'd used the feature. You'd already recorded reminders, a recipe your daughter explained to you, even a doctor's appointment so you wouldn't forget the recommendations. But this time, the use was different. It wasn't something you did every day. It was a fine line between safety and danger. Holding your breath, you found the app. You tapped on it. The screen took a few seconds to respond, or perhaps it was just your anxiety prolonging the time. When the recorder finally opened, the start recording option felt like an emergency button, a button that could change everything. His finger landed on it. One touch. The red light came on. I was recording. At that moment, you felt two things at once, fear and relief. Fear because it confirmed that what he said could be used against him someday. And relief because if something happened, if things got worse, if they tried to call you crazy, you would have a solid piece of the truth to keep. It was no longer just what you heard. Now it would be what you heard. Anyone could hear it. And here comes the strongest emotional trigger in this passage. You weren't recording out of malice. You weren't recording out of revenge. Were you recording? For survival. It was self-protection. A reaction from someone who feels surrounded without fully understanding the magnitude of the danger. A way to ensure that, if they tried to belittle you, silence you, or manipulate you, you would still have a voice there. A voice that wasn't yours, but that revealed the true face of the speaker. While the recording was playing, you forced yourself to remain still, even as his words grew harsher. Once everything is signed, things will be easier for everyone. She won't even know. That sentence sent a chill down his spine. Once everything is signed, signed what? Which documents? What things would become easier? Easier for whom? The audience listening to your story at this point feels the same chill, the same surge of fear, the same question that echoed within you. What does he intend to do to me? You didn't have all the answers, but now you had something you didn't have before. Trial. And that changes everything. The decision to record was a turning point. Before that, you were just a frail, vulnerable woman, listening to something that didn't make sense. After that, you became someone who, even weak, even at a physical disadvantage, managed to think a few steps ahead. You managed to protect yourself using what you had at hand, a phone and the courage to press a button. Perhaps if you hadn't recorded it, you yourself would have begun to doubt over time what you heard that night. Perhaps you would have convinced yourself that it was an exaggeration, an impression, paranoia, but not now. Now there was a cold, objective record, impossible to erase from memory, and later, impossible to deny. Because in extreme situations, that's exactly what the instinct for self-preservation does. It compels you to act, even when your body is telling you to stop. He makes you fight, even when it seems like you have no strength left. It makes you press record when everything inside you is shaking, because deep down, you know that might be the only thing standing between you and injustice. At that moment, alone, lying there, seemingly fragile, you did something enormous. You chose not to be just a victim. You chose to protect yourself. You chose to record your side of the story, a side that no one could later silence. And that's when the story stopped being just about what he said behind her back. And it started to be about what you would do with what you heard. The recording was on, and you could hardly believe you were hearing it. Each word that came out of your son-in-law's mouth seemed heavier than the last. His tone wasn't just cold. It was meticulous, pure calculation. You'd already heard enough to feel panic tightening in your chest. But the conversation didn't stop. In fact, it was only just beginning, and it grew darker with each passing second. Still believing you were fast asleep, he paced the room with the confidence of someone who has nothing to fear. You heard the slight scraping of a chair, the click of the phone being adjusted in his hand, and then an impatient sigh. He seemed irritated, anxious, perhaps even pressured by something or someone. Look, the documents need to be ready this week, he said, his voice muffled but perfectly audible. His heart froze. Documents? What documents? Yeah, I know. But she's getting worse. It's obvious. The word worse, it hit you like a punch to the stomach. What was getting worse? His health? His physical condition? His lucidity? And even more importantly, since when had he been following this so closely? It was as if he were monitoring you, assessing you, waiting. The tension rose within you like a slow, painful fire. He continued, his tone firmer now. If she doesn't sign soon, all of this gets complicated. We need this done. The way he spoke about you, as if you were an obstacle, a task, a problem to be solved, made your skin crawl. There was no concern. There was no affection. There wasn't even neutrality. There was haste. There was coldness. There was a goal, an objective that you didn't yet understand, but which clearly wasn't in your best interest. The silence in the room seemed to transform into a kind of oppressive echo. The sound of the refrigerator in the background, the clock on the wall ticking away the seconds, even the wind outside seemed to follow the somber cadence of the conversation. And he kept talking, as if he were in the middle of a business meeting, except you were the main topic. Yeah, the insurance covers it, but not if she delays everything. They said timing matters. His heart stopped for a moment. Insurance. Safe. What's the insurance? Why was he talking about values? Regarding deadlines? Timing? It all started to connect in a frightening way. Perhaps you weren't just dealing with a mean comment. Perhaps I was. Listening to a plan. His breathing became heavier, less controlled. Listen, I told you. She barely got up today. If we push a little more, she won't resist. It's happening naturally. They won't question it. The phrase was a brutal blow. You felt a wave of chills run through your entire body, despite the blanket. His mind screamed, he's talking about me. He's planning something. He's waiting for me to weaken. The way he pronounced won't resist sounded too dark, too cruel, too real. As the conversation progressed, the sense of danger intensified like a storm about to break. It wasn't just malice. It was intent. There was urgency in his words. Something was afoot, something that depended on his health, those documents, his signature, time. And he wasn't talking to just anyone. His voice was too low, too intimate, too comfortable. Either it was someone trustworthy, or someone involved in the same plan. Yeah, I know how much it is. It's a lot of money. That's why we can't wait. Values. Money. Urgent signatures needed. His condition is worsening. All of this formed a frightening picture. It was no coincidence, no exaggeration, no paranoia. Yes, her son-in-law was plotting something behind her back. At this point in the story, the audience feels the same knot in their stomach that you felt. Feel the urgency, the silent panic, the helplessness of that moment. You can feel the tension rising like a wall closing in around you. And then he says the phrase that drives the final nail into the coffin of doubt. They said once everything is signed, my part is done. After that, nobody will question anything. His vision blurred for a moment. His already weakened body seemed to sink even further into the sofa. Your finger gripped the phone tightly, almost like a fragile shield between you and a destiny that, until a few minutes before, you didn't even know you were at risk of facing. Tensions were reaching their peak. You were there, vulnerable, defenseless, listening. To someone who should have been family talk about you as if you were a hindrance, an obstacle, someone whose time was running out, or should be running out. And then, as if that weren't enough, he concludes with something even more cruel. Just make sure the lawyer has the papers ready. The sooner she signs, the sooner this is over. That was it. He was talking about you, about your future, from your life, to put an end to this. And you were beginning to understand that he wasn't just commenting on your health. He was planning to use it, or manipulate it, or speed something up. There, in that silent room, you realized that the danger wasn't in the street, nor in strangers, nor in sudden illnesses. The danger was inside your own home, and worse, sitting right next to you, watching you, waiting. As she listened to each venomous phrase from her son-in-law that night, a sharp thought pierced her heart like a thin blade. And my daughter, does she know? That question hurt more than anything. Because unlike him, his daughter had always been a light in his life, a sweetheart, a sensitive soul, someone who would never hurt anyone, much less him. She grew up being affectionate, caring, always concerned about the well-being of those around her. That child who shared her lunch at school, who cried when she saw an injured animal, who stayed awake when you were sick just to make sure you weren't alone. Even as an adult, she retained that essence. She could be disorganized, at times anxious, a little distracted, but always loving, always there, always your friend as well as your daughter. She was the kind of person who wanted to believe in the best in others, and that, while beautiful, also made her vulnerable, and you knew that better than anyone. When she met her husband, she was instantly charmed, too quickly in fact. You remember well the first day she introduced him, the way she smiled when talking about him, how her eyes sparkled, how she seemed to have found a safe haven. And you, as a mother, wanted to believe it was true. You wanted to believe that she had found a good, stable partner who would treat her with respect, who would be part of a happy and peaceful life by her side. She spoke of him with such admiration that it was almost impossible not to be infected by that vision. He takes care of me in a way that no one ever has. He pays attention to everything. He always knows what to do when I'm nervous. He is so calm, so centered. He makes me feel good. And you believed it, because you wanted to believe it, because she was happy, because he did, in fact, seem to fit perfectly into the image she had created. But, over time, small details began to catch her attention. Never anything glaring, never anything explicit, but details. He spoke for her, finished her sentences, always knew where she was, answered her messages before she even had time to pick up her phone. He was protective, perhaps too protective, but, once again, you attributed it all to love, to care, to his personality. Your daughter never seemed to notice anything strange. In her mind, that man was her security, her support, her rock, and that, in a way, worried you, but not enough to suspect something as serious as what you discovered that night. While he was on the phone, pressing you about documents, amounts, deadlines, and how you were getting worse, your heart ached with the pain of the possible betrayal, but also with the cruel possibility that your daughter was involved, or worse, that she was being used. The idea that she might know about his plans hit her like a punch, strong enough to take her breath away. Is she involved in this? Does she agree? Does she want my signature? My money? My downfall? But seconds later, your reason would try to pull you back to lucidity. No, his daughter wasn't like that. She was innocent. She never showed ambition. She never saw you as a burden. Her love always seemed genuine, sweet, selfless. Then, another question arose, even more painful. What if she doesn't know? What if she was completely blinded by her husband? What if she was being manipulated? What if you believed everything he said? What if he portrayed you as too fragile, as confused, as incapable? What if he was using her kind, and sometimes naive, heart to further his own plans? That thought hurt in an indescribable way, because regardless of the truth, you were in the middle of a silent war, and your daughter may not even have known she had been put on the chessboard. Did you remember any recent conversations? He just wants you to rest, Mom. He's worried about you. He thinks you're too tired. He said it might be best if you let him handle these things, so you don't get stressed. At the time, those phrases seemed like mere caution. Now, in light of the recording, they take on a different tone. He was shaping her perception. He was preparing the ground. He was creating a narrative where you were weak, incapable, vulnerable, exactly how you were that night. And that made it all the more frightening, because your daughter believed in him, trusted him, admired qualities in him that you were now beginning to see as manipulation. She was never bad. He was never selfish. I would never, in my entire life, wish to harm you. But she also seemed to be exactly the type of person who doesn't realize when someone is leading her down a silent path, a path conceived by another mind, a colder, more calculating, more dangerous mind. You felt an overwhelming urge to protect her. At the same time, he was afraid to confront her, and that she wouldn't believe him, because that was the biggest risk. She trusts him more than she trusts you. And then, in that dark room, you realized you weren't just fighting for yourself. She was fighting for her daughter as well, for opening your eyes, for showing the truth, to prove that behind that sweet smile, that man carried something too dark to be ignored. As the recording continued, you gripped the phone tightly, trying to maintain control of your body and your breathing, and, at the same time, you fought against the pain of thinking that your daughter, the greatest love of your life, might be involved, even unknowingly, in the plan of the man you had just discovered you didn't know at all. That question, that fear, this mixture of love and mistrust, that's exactly what makes the audience hold their breath. And the question that echoed inside you remained strong. sharp and desperate. Does she know? When silence finally filled the room and your son-in-law ended the call, you remained motionless, not just because you were weak, but because your mind was racing. Every sentence you had heard seemed to rearrange itself in your head, like pieces of a puzzle that were once scattered, but now began to fit together with frightening clarity. It was as if you were finally seeing an image that had always been there, only hidden behind his mask of kindness. Did you remember the first sentence? She won't last long. After, she's getting worse. And then, the documents need to be ready this week. Documents, deadlines, signatures, values, safe. These words begin to form a desperate arrangement within your mind. First came the shock, then came the fear, and now came the understanding. Slow, painful, inevitable. You recalled every detail of the last few months. Your daughter insisting you spend more time at their house. Your son-in-law always asking about your medications, your tests, your pains. He was always around, too helpful, too attentive, too interested in everything concerning your health. And then, a thought shrouded in ice ran down his spine. Was he waiting for my condition to worsen? Conversations that had previously seemed like concern now had a bitter taste. The way he watched you silently as you stumbled to your feet. The comment he once made, almost jokingly, "Maybe it's time you let me help you with the paperwork, right?" You laughed at the time. Now you understand. It wasn't a joke. And then came the cruelest part. At home. You remembered how, months ago, there was that quick conversation about updating the property registration. He had suggested it to make things easier, since his daughter lived with him, and they could take care of everything if you needed anything. You refused at the time because you felt it wasn't the right moment yet. There was no reason to change anything. But now, hearing everything he heard that night, that conversation took on a different weight. It was another piece of the plan. Then another memory surfaced, something you had almost forgotten. A casual, innocent conversation in the kitchen. Have you ever thought about giving power of attorney to a family member? Just in case. It's good to have that ready, you know? At the time, it seemed like care. Now it seemed like a step. And then came the final blow. The insurance. You had never really thought about it much. But you remembered a visit he made to your house, saying that an insurance company had changed a procedure and that you could update some information. You thought it was strange that he knew about these things, but since you didn't fully understand, you decided to deal with it later. But now, sitting on that couch, listening to everything, you realized he knew too much. He knew exactly what was needed. I knew the deadlines exactly. I knew exactly how much was involved. And that was the most terrifying thing. He wasn't speculating. He was informed. He was coordinating. He was planning. And the worst part? Everything seemed calculated based on his state of health, his weakness, your dizziness, your tiredness, your vulnerability. Each of those things you'd felt in the last few days now took on a different hue. They weren't just symptoms. They were opportunities in his eyes. The recording kept playing in his mind like a movie that can't be paused. Once everything is signed, timing matters. She won't resist. The lawyer needs the papers ready. It's a lot of money. And for the first time, you saw the whole picture. It wasn't just a cruel phrase uttered carelessly. He wasn't just an impatient son-in-law. It wasn't just a conversation about bureaucracy. It was a plan. A plan built calmly, step by step with manipulation, and in haste because he believed you wouldn't last long. And this is where the tension of the story explodes in the audience's chest, because now the viewer understands that you, in that dark room, were not just vulnerable. You were in the crosshairs of someone who was supposed to protect you. And it wasn't just an attack against you, but against everything you've built. Your home, your assets, your future, your autonomy. The feeling of silent terror grows when you remember small actions of his that didn't make sense before. How he insisted you rest. How he told your daughter you needed help. How he got irritated when you said you were feeling better. How he suggested making the paperwork easier. The truth is that all of this now formed a single path. He needed your signature, and I needed it soon. The audience witnesses this moment as if they were sitting right next to you, feeling the heavy breathing, the butterflies in their stomach, the weight of the discovery. They realize it's not just about fear, but about revelation. The moment the light comes on in a dark room, and you finally see the monster that was there all along, only now it's standing still, smiling, pretending to be family. Deep down, you already knew the name of that feeling: betrayal. Not just ordinary betrayal, but the deepest kind of betrayal. the kind that is born within one's own home. And now that you saw the whole picture, a new question arose, sharper than all the others. What do I need to do to survive this? When your son-in-law finally left the room and silence settled in once more, you realized your breath was caught in your chest. It was as if you had spent minutes, perhaps hours, holding your breath while trying to comprehend everything you had heard. Your body still felt heavy. The medication was still taking effect, but your mind was more alert than ever. You knew you needed to listen to everything again, calmly, attentively, intentionally. With some difficulty, you retrieved your cell phone from under the blanket. Your hands trembled, not only from physical weakness, but from the weight of the recording you now carried. A raw, dangerous, and terrible truth. The kind of truth that could save your life, or destroy someone you considered family. You opened the recording app, pressed the play button, and heard your own weak breathing in the background. Then came his words, clear, cruel, calculated, cutting through the silence of the room like sharp blades. She won't last long. The phrase alone would have been enough to frighten anyone. But you kept listening because you needed to understand every nuance. She's getting worse. It's obvious. Obvious. The conviction in his voice sent shivers down her spine. He spoke like someone observing, evaluating, confirming, not like someone who cares. We need the documents ready this week. The urgency was clear. It was as if there was an external deadline, pressure coming from another person or from some ongoing process. If she doesn't sign soon, it complicates everything. That phrase sounded like a warning, or like a veiled threat directed not at you, but at someone on the other end of the line. The insurance covers it, but timing matters. The mention of insurance sent a wave of nausea through his stomach. What exactly was being covered up? What time was he talking about? Once everything is signed, my part is done. This was the sentence that affected you the most. Your role, your job, its function. All of this relates to your life, your health, your existence. If we push a little more, she won't resist. It's happening naturally. That you had to pause for a few seconds. It was too cruel, too cold, too direct. And the last sentence, like an open wound that won't stop bleeding, the sooner she signs, the sooner this is over. You heard it all 2, 3, 4 times, even tired, even scared, even weakened. You knew you needed to understand every syllable, every pause, every intonation. The repetition made everything even more real. The recording wasn't a delusion. It wasn't a confused dream. It was proof, concrete proof, documented proof, proof that anyone could hear and immediately understand the danger they were in. And then came a new instinct, an instinct that was not just for survival, but for strategy. You knew you couldn't risk losing that recording. If something happened to your phone, if it were erased, if your son-in-law would notice, if he decided to act sooner than expected, you needed to think like someone who is fighting for their life. And even though you were weak, you managed to be extremely intelligent. First, he saved the recording on his own cell phone with a discreet name, something no one would suspect. Then, he sent the file to his email. You typed slowly, with difficulty, but precisely. It was as if each transmission was a piece of security being built. After that, you opened the cloud application and sent it there as well. 1, 2, 3 times, checking if it had actually appeared in the folder. The fear of losing that proof was so great that you repeated the process in different options. Google Drive, OneDrive, even a messaging group you had on your own, used for reminders. Each shipment felt like a breath of hope. Each backup felt like an extra layer of protection. And that is the authoritative touch of the narrative. You didn't act on emotional impulse. You acted strategically, with caution, with intelligence, as someone who knows that their life depends on the accuracy of their next decisions. After ensuring the recording was saved in multiple locations, you allowed yourself to lean back on the sofa again. But there was no rest. Your body still trembled. Your chest still ached. Your hands were still cold. The weight of the situation was so great it felt like it was pressing on your heart. You closed your eyes for a moment and let the question that the entire audience would also be asking echo within themselves. What is he planning? And why does it depend so much on me? That recording, up to that point, was her only weapon. Her only chance to prove the truth. Her only way to protect her daughter. The same daughter who might have been blinded by manipulation, emotional dependence, and misplaced trust. And as you took a deep breath, trying to gather strength for what was to come, a certainty was born within you. You were no longer alone. You had the proof. He could no longer deny it. He could no longer hide it. He could no longer pretend. From that point on, her story ceased to be the story of a vulnerable person, and it began to transform into the story of someone who found the courage to face a danger that no one would ever imagine existed within their own family. After saving the audio everywhere possible and checking each upload like someone inspecting ropes before crossing a fragile bridge, you took a deep breath and made a decision. You wouldn't confront him now. Not while she was weak, not while she didn't yet understand the extent of the plan, not while she didn't have a solid strategy to protect herself and her daughter. It was time to use the greatest power a vulnerable person can have: silence. And silence, used intelligently, can be more terrifying than any word. You kept your eyes closed when you heard the sound of his footsteps returning to the room. He walked slowly, perhaps to check if you were still asleep. You controlled your breathing, keeping it deep and steady, trying to mimic the rhythm of a deep sleep. Your heart seemed to be beating too fast, as if it could betray you, but you remained steadfast. He stood beside her for a few seconds. You felt it. She felt his presence, the warmth of his body, the scent of his cologne, even the faint sound of his breathing. It was as if he were analyzing her, confirming that his plan was still working, that she was the fragile piece he needed her to be. Then he walked away, and you only opened your eyes after he left the room. From that moment on, a silent game began, a dangerous game made of glances, gestures, subtle observations, and absolute silence. You needed to act as if nothing had happened, and that required an emotional strength few possessed. Your body trembled inside, but on the outside, you needed to be the same person as always: the kind mother, the sympathetic mother-in-law, the fragile woman he believed was easy to manipulate. The next morning, you woke up early, still weak, but determined. When he entered the kitchen, you greeted him with your usual gentle smile. "Good morning, my love." He responded with an automatic smile, but there was something new in his eyes, something that perhaps had always been there, but that you could only now see clearly. A cold glint, a sense of urgency, an impatience that seemed hidden behind his politeness. While he was making coffee, you watched. Every movement, each expression, every detail, and little by little, she began to notice behaviors that had previously gone unnoticed. He spoke more rigidly. His eyes seemed to watch her every gesture, the way he closed doors, pulled out chairs, moved the cups. Everything had a heavier energy, as if he were holding something inside, a contained irritation, a growing frustration, perhaps because you were still there, perhaps because, in his mind, you were taking too long to get worse, or perhaps because he was realizing he didn't have complete control over you. When his daughter entered the kitchen, he quickly embraced her, kissed her forehead, and acted like the perfect husband. But you noticed something. It was forced. It was exaggerated. It was a rehearsed display. Those caresses were perfectly timed so you would see them, to feed the illusion, to reinforce the narrative that he was the ideal man who would never do anything wrong. Over the course of several days, you continued to observe, silently, carefully, and the more he watched, the more he saw it falling apart. He began to correct his daughter more frequently. He interrupted her sentences. I disagreed with everything she said. He gave orders disguised as suggestions. It created small but constant tensions. And when he spoke to you, there was a sense of urgency, a harshness, a growing unease. Did you take your medicine? You shouldn't walk alone. You're more tired today, aren't you? It's best to leave this to me. It was as if he were trying to convince you that you were getting worse, always getting worse, as if he were trying to make sure you actually believed it. You answered calmly, always polite, always neutral, always calm. But inside, every word he spoke burned. As the days went by, you began to notice that he avoided spending much time alone with you, perhaps out of fear that you would say something, perhaps out of fear that you had noticed something, perhaps because some part of him, the part that is still afraid of being caught, was on alert. He seemed restless, like a predator that senses its prey has changed its behavior, but you continued acting as always, and that made him even more nervous. With each silence from her, he grew more impatient. He watched every normal gesture with suspicion. With each smile of hers, he would furrow his brow slightly. And this is the most powerful psychological trigger in this chapter. The audience realizes he's about to explode, that he is losing control. The mask is melting. The tension builds like a rope being stretched to its limit. The climax happens at a simple moment. During dinner, you asked for the salt to be passed. Just that. An everyday, harmless gesture. He raised his hand too forcefully, slammed the salt on the table roughly, and said in a tone he couldn't hide, "You need to take care of yourself. You can't continue like this. You're going to end up complicating everything." The entire table fell silent. His daughter didn't understand the double meaning, but you noticed, and he also realized that you realized. Your eyes met for a single second, but it was enough to reveal everything. He knew he was losing control. Did you know he was becoming dangerous? And at that moment, the certainty began to emerge that the final confrontation was approaching. Silent, tense, inevitable. The house was about to become a minefield, and any miscalculated move could make everything explode. After days living in that silent theater, pretending not to know anything while observing your son-in-law's every move, you realized one thing very clearly. You wouldn't be able to face that on your own. It wasn't enough to be afraid. It wasn't enough to have the recording. It wasn't enough to feel that something very wrong was happening. You needed to understand what it really meant. You needed to know what he could or couldn't do with your vulnerability, with your documents, with your assets. You needed someone who knew the laws, someone who wouldn't be fooled by smiles, speeches, or masks, someone who looked at that audio not as a drama, but astral. That's when you made a decision that would change the course of everything. Seek legal counsel. You didn't tell your daughter. Not at that moment. Not while she had doubts about how much she knew, how involved she was, or how blinded she was by love. So, one day when your daughter went out to take care of things with her husband, you made a huge effort to get ready. Your body still ached, the tiredness was still there, but there was something new sustaining you, a sense of purpose. You weren't just going to the doctor. You were going to defend yourself, to protect yourself, to stand up for yourself. She called an office recommended by an acquaintance. She didn't give many details over the phone, just said she needed to talk about family matters and important documents. On the other end, the secretary scheduled an appointment, and her gentle voice gave her a small sense of relief. She was no longer confined to the silence of her home. On the appointed day, you entered the office. The walls were lined with books, discreet paintings, everything very organized. The atmosphere had that specific smell of paper, coffee, and seriousness. It was a place where stories like yours were analyzed without romanticization. There, facts mattered, evidence mattered, rights mattered. The lawyer who greeted you didn't seem intimidating. He was calm, spoke firmly, and had an attentive gaze. He greeted you respectfully, offered you water, and asked you to sit down carefully. After a few moments, he said, "You can tell me calmly. I'm here to listen." It was the first time, since that night, that you were able to speak aloud. You talked about the illness, the medication, the weakness. You talked about your son-in-law, his overly helpful nature, his insistence on documents, the conversation about the house, about the power of attorney, about making things easier. And then, with your hands still a little shaky, you took your cell phone out of your bag, opened the file, and said, "But what I'm about to show you is what scares me the most." He leaned back in his chair, put on his glasses, adjusted his posture, as if preparing for something serious. You pressed play. The room filled with the voice of her son-in-law. Each phrase you knew by heart, now echoed in a neutral environment. "She won't last long. She's getting worse. We need the documents ready this week. If she doesn't sign soon, it complicates everything. The insurance covers it, but timing matters. Once everything is signed, my part is done. If we push a little more, she won't resist. It's happening naturally. The sooner she signs, the sooner this is over." You watched the lawyer's face as he listened. He didn't interrupt. He wasn't making faces. He didn't dramatize it, but you could see it. His expression was becoming increasingly serious, his gaze more focused, his brow slightly furrowed. It was the face of someone who, silently, was already classifying the situation legally. When the audio ended, the room was silent for a few seconds. You could feel your heart pounding in your ears, until finally, he took off his glasses, took a deep breath, and spoke calmly, but with a weight you had never heard before. "This is very serious." His stomach sank. You weren't exaggerating. You weren't crazy. You weren't making things up in your head. He continued, "From the way he speaks, it seems like he's counting on your vulnerability. He mentions documents, talks about signatures, deadlines, insurance, amounts, and what's most worrying is how he treats your health condition as part of a plan." You felt the tears welling up, but you held them back. He then asked the question that no one had ever asked before. "Has he tried to get you to sign anything? Have they mentioned a power of attorney, or appointing someone as your legal representative?" The memory immediately pulled you back to those seemingly innocent conversations. It's good to have a power of attorney. It's best to make things easier. If anything happens, someone trustworthy will take care of it. You nodded, explaining this. The lawyer took another deep breath, adjusting a piece of paper on the table. Look, I can't say for sure that he's committed a crime yet, because nothing has happened. But his intention here is clear enough to set off all the red flags. What this audio shows is someone possibly trying to take advantage of your vulnerability, using legal documents to gain control. Then he explained calmly, almost didactically, what could be behind that behavior. When he talks about signature, documents, and being able to solve everything, it's possible he's trying to get legal power over you, a broad power of attorney, or even consider filing a declaration of incapacity in the future, if you can convince people that you are not capable of making decisions on your own. You felt a chill just hearing the word disability. It was as if they were trying to erase you while you were still alive. If he manages to do that, the lawyer continued, he can manage your assets, sell your house, move money through accounts, make medical decisions without consulting you, all in your name. The feeling of danger, which was previously only emotional, now took on a legal dimension. He wasn't just a bad son-in-law. This was someone who, given time, could take everything from you. But there, too, a glimmer of hope emerged. The good news, he said firmly, is that you're still lucid. You know exactly what's happening, and you have proof that there's possible manipulation underway. This audio is powerful, very powerful. This is where the authority trigger comes in. From that moment on, it was no longer just you finding something strange. It was a professional saying, "This is serious. That's dangerous. You have rights." He then instructed you. First, don't sign anything without showing it to me first. No papers, no documents, not even a simple form. Second, continue acting normally. The less he knows you've noticed, the better. Third, we're going to record all of this. I'll keep a copy of this audio here. And, if necessary, we can take legal action to protect you. You watched him, feeling something you hadn't felt in a long time. Security. For the first time since that night, you felt supported. I was no longer fighting alone in the dark. There was someone on your side, with knowledge, with strategy, with tools that you didn't have. When you left the office, the world outside seemed the same. Cars passing by, people walking, the distant noise of the city. But inside, everything had changed. You were no longer just a vulnerable woman, trapped on a sofa, listening to whispers in the early hours of the morning. You were someone who had proof, who was aware of the danger, and now you had legal support. And from that point on, the story was no longer just about his plan. It was also starting to be about his plan. The plan is to survive, protect oneself, and, at the right moment, reveal everything. After meeting with the lawyer and realizing that you weren't imagining things, that everything had a legal basis, intention, and real danger, something changed inside you. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was clarity. It was strategy. It was determination. But above all, it was love for his daughter. Her daughter didn't deserve to live with someone capable of orchestrating something so cruel. She didn't deserve to be manipulated, used as a shield, or as a pawn in a plan involving her own mother. And that's why you decided it was time for the truth. No matter how painful it was, it didn't matter how devastating it would be for her. She needed to know. She deserved to know. You chose a time when your son-in-law wasn't home. He had gone out to take care of some things, as he always said with that rehearsed nonchalance that you now knew concealed ulterior motives. As soon as the door slammed shut, you took a deep breath and called your daughter over to talk. She came to you smiling, holding a cup of tea that she had lovingly prepared. "You need to stay hydrated, Mom. Are you feeling better today?" Seeing that genuine care hurt. It hurt because you would need to destroy, at that moment, the image of the man she thought she had by her side. But you knew it was necessary. "Daughter, sit here with me," you said, your voice firm but gentle. She sat down. He noticed the seriousness on her face, and, immediately, concern filled his eyes. "What happened? Are you feeling unwell? Do you want me to call him?" That last sentence was the final push you needed. You held her hand. He looked deeply into her eyes. "No, don't call him. I need to talk about him." Her daughter frowned, confused, but did not back down. That's when you picked up your phone and opened the audio file. I felt his hands sweating, his fingers trembling slightly. but you pressed play. The room filled with his voice once more, whispered, cold, calculated. She won't last long. We need the documents ready this week. The insurance covers it. Timing matters. If we push a little more, she won't resist. Once everything is signed, my part is done. Her daughter remained motionless, wide-eyed. The teacup trembled in her hands until she had to put it down on the table. Shortness of breath. His face was turning pale. When the audio ended, the silence became deafening. She looked at you as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Mom, is this true? Is this real? Her voice came out broken, almost childlike. You simply nodded, holding her hand tenderly, but also firmly. Then, as if a dam had broken inside her, her daughter began to cry. Not a light cry, but a deep cry of despair, shock, guilt, and betrayal. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know, she repeated, sobbing. I never imagined. He would never be capable of, but he would be. And so it was. You hugged your daughter, who was crying uncontrollably on your shoulder. At that moment, it became clear how manipulated she was, how blinded by love she had become, how skilled he was at hiding his true face. She was not an accomplice. She was a victim just like you, but in a different way. After several long minutes, her daughter wiped away her tears with her sleeve. Her face was still wet, but now there was something different about it. Anger. A rage that came from the depths of the soul. We're going to sort this out, she said, her voice choked with emotion but firm. He won't touch anything of yours, and he won't touch me again. And it was at that exact moment that the front door opened. His son-in-law came in, the man who, 2 hours earlier, had easily manipulated everyone around him, now entered unaware that his mask had fallen. He smiled when he saw you two in the room. That rehearsed smile. That smile that you now recognized as fake. What's going on? He asked, sensing the tension in the air. Her daughter stood up slowly. His eyes were still red, but full of determination. We need to talk, she said through gritted teeth. He looked at you, then at her, trying to gauge the situation. But before he could say anything, his daughter pressed the play button again. His voice echoed through the room, and at that moment, his smile vanished. Their eyes widened. Breathing stopped for a second. He turned pale. The mask has completely fallen off. He tried to speak. That's not what it looks like. You misunderstood. Honey, let me explain. But there was no explanation. There was no justification. There was no way out. The audio spoke for itself. He had been caught. No room for lies. No room for manipulation. No room for twisting the narrative. Your daughter confronted you in a way you'd never seen before. How could you have the nerve? How could you do this to my mother? To me? How could you plan all this as if she were a burden? He tried to approach her, but she took a step back, as if, for the first time, he was truly seeing him. And then, in one of the most powerful moments of her life, her daughter said, "The justice system will hear about this, and you will answer for everything." She left the room crying, but with dignity. You stood there, staring at the man who tried to destroy your life. He lowered his head, not knowing what to say. You didn't need to say anything. The truth was out in the open. In the following days, everything happened quickly. Your lawyer has taken the necessary steps. The audio was recorded. A police report was filed. Your son-in-law received a summons. Justice intervened. And for the first time in a long time, you breathed a sigh of relief. The truth had finally come to light, and no one could erase it. When everything finally came to light, when the audio was handed over to the authorities, when your daughter opened her eyes to the truth and decided to distance herself from that man, something inside you, something that had been dormant for months, began to awaken. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't simple. It wasn't a magical moment when suddenly everything was resolved and you started smiling again. Not at all. The truth is, you had to relearn how to breathe, relearning to trust, relearning how to exist without fear within one's own home. Because the biggest wound in that story wasn't just his son-in-law's plan. It wasn't just manipulation, nor the intention to use you or to weaken you for their own benefit. The worst pain was realizing you were vulnerable, and that someone who should have protected you chose to do the exact opposite, and yet, you moved on. The days that followed were silent, but liberating. The lawyer guided you every step of the way. Your daughter, devastated but strong, began to accompany you to absolutely everything. Appointments, calls, meetings. She cried sometimes, not because she doubted you, but because she felt guilty for not having realized it sooner. You always comforted her. You always repeated the same phrase, which became a mantra between the two of you. He deceived you, daughter. It wasn't you who failed. He's the one who lied. And that phrase, said and repeated, helped not only your daughter, but you as well. Because deep down, you needed to believe in her too. The house was yours again. Its essence, its scent, its energy. Each room seemed lighter now that the invisible weight was gone. Over time, your physical strength also began to return. You went back to the doctor, reviewed your medication, and had tests done. You discovered that part of your weakness came from the silent anxiety you had been accumulating. Another part came from unintentional neglect. You weren't eating properly, you were sleeping poorly, and the constant tension was eroding your health without you realizing it. But now, none of that was quiet anymore. You were alert, I was conscious, and she was no longer alone. Her daughter became her most loyal ally. She was there every morning with a warm coffee, long hugs, and heartfelt words. You talked like before, or perhaps even better than before. The pain you went through together created a bridge between you, a bridge that hadn't existed before. And in that process, you discovered a profound truth. Sometimes life tears us apart only to bring us back together. Stronger, more aware, more prepared. The justice system did its part. His son-in-law was removed from his position. Documents were blocked. Signatures have been invalidated. And the process revealed that he was indeed trying to gain legal advantages over you. Something that, if it had happened, could have changed everything. But nothing changed. Because you heard. Because you recorded it. Because you protected yourself. Because you made difficult decisions when your body barely had the strength to do so. And in the end, you understood something that once seemed simple, but now carried immense weight. Trust is precious. And once broken, it's never the same again. Therefore, her final message, for her daughter, for those who love her, and even for anyone who hears her story, is clear, true, and profound. Never ignore the signs. Small signs, inner discomfort, out-of-place phrases, subtle attitudes, all of this matters. The body speaks, the soul warns, intuition screams, and even those who love need to learn to listen. And another indispensable truth, those who love you, protect you. They don't plan your downfall. Love does not require weakness. Love doesn't calculate. Love doesn't pressure you with documents, values, or deadlines. Love doesn't operate in the shadows. Love doesn't feign concern while counting down the days of your vulnerability. Those who truly love you will lift you up when you are weak. Someone who truly loves you won't tolerate dark thoughts about your life. Those who truly love you want you alive, strong, and present, never fading away too soon for convenience. Today, after everything, you are standing again. Not the same person, but a more conscious, more lucid, more intuitive version. You learned to watch out for spaces where danger can enter. He learned to differentiate between care and control. He learned that false kindness is more poisonous than shouting. And above all, she learned that her life is too valuable to be left in the wrong hands. You rebuilt your bond with your daughter. She learned to see beyond appearances. You two, together, now know that love doesn't mean blindness. It means choice. It means courage. It means limits. And that's the final reflection you leave us with. Not just as advice, but as lived truth. Trust is a treasure, and treasures need care, boundaries, and wisdom. Because there are people who know how to fake love, but there are also people who know how to truly love. And these are the ones that deserve to remain in your life. If this story has captivated you this far, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me bring you more intense stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if you heard a family member saying something like that about you?